Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
A peaceful summer afternoon at Kensington Palace. No one expected that, in just a few short minutes, a surprising announcement would spark speculation about the future of the entire British royal family. There was no state ceremony, no announcement from Buckingham Palace, no King Charles or Queen Camilla in attendance. Everything looked like a normal charity event, where Prince William, Princess Catherine, Prince George, and Princess Charlotte smiled and greeted the public. But then, William stepped forward. In the quiet atmosphere, he made an announcement that stunned the entire crowd. Princess Charlotte would begin her official royal duties. The surprise wasn't just that Charlotte was so young. What sparked even more discussion was that Queen Camilla seemed completely unaware of this decision. If the story is accurate, this isn't simply a young princess making her public debut. It could be a sign that a new generation is gradually entering the center of the monarchy. So, what really happened at Kensington that day? Why did Prince William choose this particular time to make the announcement? And what role did Princess Catherine play in what was supposedly months of preparation? Before we begin, if you enjoy fascinating stories, analyses, and perspectives on the British royal family, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the latest videos. Okay, let's follow the whole story now. Looking back at the months leading up to that announcement, William's decision didn't seem to come as a sudden event. Small signs had been quietly emerging, disjointed, but continuous, like pieces gradually forming a larger picture. William reportedly held private meetings with high-ranking Commonwealth officials. The content of these discussions wasn't public, but their timing and frequency drew attention from many within the palace. At the same time, Catherine was described as becoming increasingly involved in matters concerning public image community activities and the long-term direction of the Welsh family. More notably, Charlotte appeared to have been prepared for media exposure much earlier than many had anticipated. Her appearances were no longer purely family or ceremonial. Charlotte began to be placed in more deliberate positions, where every gesture, every glance, and every reaction could be observed by the public. Inside the palace, some staff members also began to notice the shifting focus. More and more important events revolved around William and Catherine. The media prioritized images of the Welsh family. Diplomatic representatives were reportedly paying more attention to Kensington Palace. George and Charlotte also appeared in more distinctly symbolic settings than before. There was no official announcement confirming that a major plan was underway. But in the royal family, significant changes rarely begin with a bombshell announcement. They usually begin with schedules, with who is invited into the meeting room, with very small personnel changes, with meetings that don't appear in the press, with how the media is directed, and most importantly, by who gets to stand at the center of attention in each public appearance. When all these details are put together, they all seem to point to one conclusion. William and Catherine weren't just reacting to the present. They had been quietly preparing for the future long before Charlotte stepped forward that afternoon. While William and Catherine quietly prepared for the future, another development began to emerge within the royal family. King Charles was described as gradually reducing his public appearances. Several appointments were canceled. Several important events took place without the king's presence. The reason given was fatigue and the need for rest after a long period of intense pressure. And from a human perspective, that is perfectly understandable. Charles had waited almost his entire life to ascend the throne. But when that moment finally arrived, he faced a role far more burdensome than what the public perceived. However, in a monarchy, every void needs to be filled. And the person who stepped into that void was William. Each time William and Catherine appeared, the public reaction seemed to intensify. The crowds grew larger. The press paid more attention. Their images spread rapidly on social media. And the reception for the Welsh family was often warm, intimate, and full of anticipation. One detail mentioned in the story further highlights this contrast. William reportedly chose to visit a pediatric cancer treatment unit in Manchester instead of attending an important meeting chaired by Charles. Procedurally, the King's meeting should have been the event that received more attention. But what happened afterward was completely the opposite. The media focused almost entirely on William's visit. Images of him talking to young patients, listening to their families, and spending time at the hospital quickly became the center of attention. Meanwhile, Charles's event was almost relegated to the background. Perhaps William didn't intentionally try to compete with his father. Perhaps he simply chose a task he deemed meaningful. But in the public eye, the message remains clear. The energy, attention, and hope for the monarchy are shifting toward William. That's what makes the story both worrying and somewhat sad. Charles is still king. He still holds the throne, the title, and the official power. But more and more people are beginning to ask the inevitable question, who is truly shaping the image of the British monarchy? The shift unfolding around William may not be entirely unexpected for those who were once closest to the center of power. In her final months, Queen Elizabeth II is said to have advised Charles to prepare for a smooth transition to William. She understood better than anyone that the monarchy could not survive solely on tradition, ritual, or titles passed down through generations. It could only continue to exist if the public still saw value in the presence of the royal family. Queen Elizabeth is described as having recognized early on that William had the ability to connect with a younger generation. Catherine offered a sense of stability, approachability, and trustworthiness. George and Charlotte, though young, were beginning to become symbols of the future of the crown. And if the preparations were made early enough, the subsequent transition could have been orderly, rather than a chaotic and contentious period. Queen Elizabeth's advice wasn't a call for Charles to relinquish his position. It was a reminder that a monarch has a responsibility not only to rule in the present, but also to prepare for his successor. However, Camilla reportedly disagreed with any plan that would remove her and Charles from the central role. From Camilla's perspective, this is understandable. She had spent years gaining recognition, standing alongside Charles, and eventually becoming queen. Therefore, any change that diminished their roles could be seen as a direct threat. And it is here that the core conflict of the story begins to emerge. One side believes that the future must be prepared for early. The other wants to protect their current power and position. Between these two paths, William gradually emerged as a figure considered legitimate, not only because of his line of succession, but also because of the very legacy that Queen Elizabeth was believed to have wanted to protect. While William was the one making the public announcement, Catherine seemed to have been quietly preparing for the moment for a long time. She wasn't just appearing as William's wife or a quiet mother caring for the children. Catherine is described as the strategic center behind the entire plan for Charlotte. Months before the announcement, she reportedly began meticulously researching public reaction to Charlotte taking on a larger role in the royal family. Catherine and William didn't act on impulse. They monitored poll results. They observed how the media reported on Charlotte. They read public reactions after each of her appearances. They assessed the level of affection Charlotte received. And they paid particular attention to how George reacted to having to share the attention with his sister. The results were described as very clear. Charlotte received strong support. The public saw in her a calm, natural demeanor and a rare charm for her age. But Catherine understood that public adoration alone wasn't enough. Charlotte needed to be prepared to understand that a royal role wasn't just about standing in front of cameras or appearing in beautiful outfits. It was about responsibility. It was about discipline. It was about the ability to remain calm even when all eyes were on her. Therefore, Catherine reportedly began guiding her daughter step by step. How to stand in front of a crowd without appearing nervous. How to listen to the person opposite. how to answer concisely but still show interest, how to control her expressions when reporters and cameras were constantly following her, and most importantly, how to understand that every appearance had to be connected to the spirit of serving the community. Catherine didn't want Charlotte to grow up thinking that her title made her special. She wanted her daughter to understand that a title only has meaning when used to help others. While all these preparations were underway, Catherine remained silent about the alleged tensions with Camilla. She didn't argue in the media. She didn't make any veiled remarks. She didn't try to defend herself against rumors. She simply remained silent. But that silence wasn't interpreted as a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it was a display of discipline, confidence, and control. Catherine seemed to understand that in the royal family, the most talkative person isn't necessarily the most influential. Sometimes the most powerful person is the one who quietly prepares, waits for the right moment, and lets the results speak for themselves. It was also the result of months of careful preparation from Catherine, who was quietly ensuring that her daughter was not only ready to appear in public, but also strong enough to become an important part of the future of the crown. While William and Catherine were steadily preparing for a new generation, Camilla seemed to be realizing that everything she had spent years building was slipping away. To understand Camilla's reaction, one must look back at the long road she had traveled. For decades, her name was synonymous with the controversies surrounding the marriage of Charles and Princess Diana. She faced public outrage, incessant comparisons to Diana, the intense pressure following the death of the world's most beloved princess, and a seemingly endless process of image restoration. Step by step, Camilla learned to appear more discreet. She chose less controversial activities. She persevered in standing by Charles, and after years of waiting, she finally became queen. That should have been the culmination of her journey. But as soon as she reached the pinnacle of her career, Camilla witnessed a completely different reality unfolding around her. Catherine was increasingly popular with the public. William attracted intense attention almost everywhere he appeared. George and Charlotte became the image of a younger, more vibrant future. Meanwhile, palace staff, the media, and even diplomatic representatives seemed to be shifting their focus to Kensington Palace. For Camilla, this wasn't just a change in how the press reported the news. It was a sign that the influence she had fought so hard to gain was gradually diminishing. Camilla convened an emergency meeting with her palace advisors. She wanted to know why important decisions were being made without coordination from the king's office. She wanted to restore the old order. She wanted to remind everyone that Charles was still king and she was still queen. Perhaps Camilla hoped Charles would step up, reassert his authority, and demand that all changes be made according to hierarchy. But his reaction was quite different. Charles is said to have simply said, "Let things take their natural course. It has already begun." It was a short statement, but it carried very different meanings for each person. For Charles, it could have been an acknowledgement that times were changing, and William needed to be allowed to move forward. It could also have been the weary acceptance of someone who understood that not every movement within the royal family could be controlled by command. But for Camilla, it sounded like a terrifying warning. If even the king was unwilling or unable to stop the transition, what could she rely on to protect her position? And it was at that moment that Camilla realized this battle was no longer just about vying for attention. It is a confrontation between an old order trying to cling to its position and a future that has begun to move forward without waiting for permission. The atmosphere at Kensington Palace that afternoon initially showed no sign of a historic event. The outdoor grounds were prepared for a familiar charity event, with neatly arranged rows of chairs, flags gently swaying in the breeze, and the soft chatter of guests. Reporters arrived early, but few expected to witness anything beyond a routine royal activity. They prepared their cameras to capture familiar moments. Catherine elegantly walking down the aisle with a calm smile. George somewhat awkwardly dressed in his formal suit. Charlotte cheerfully waving to the crowd, and William giving a brief speech about the community service before the program concluded. Everything unfolded exactly as in a typical royal event. There were no special ceremonies, no appearance by King Charles or Queen Camilla, no announcement from Buckingham Palace signaling that a momentous decision was about to be made. That very silence made what followed even more surprising. When it was his turn to speak, William didn't begin with donation figures or thanks to the donors. He spent the first few minutes mentioning the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II and speaking about the values she had upheld throughout her reign. According to the speech described in the story, William emphasized that tradition only has meaning when it adapts to the times. He said that the crown wasn't a relic of the past, kept behind palace walls, but a living promise of service to the people. The space fell silent. Hundreds of eyes followed William as he paused for a few seconds before slowly turning to look at Charlotte standing beside Catherine. That moment made many feel the speech was leading to something far greater than a message about charity. Then William delivered his declaration, which nearly silenced the entire courtyard. He announced that Princess Charlotte would begin her official duties as a royal representative. Not in a few years when she was more mature. Not at some unspecified point in the future. But starting right now, Charlotte would accompany Catherine to public events, gradually learning about public service, how to represent the royal family in public, and being prepared for a long-term role in the future. As soon as those words were spoken, the atmosphere changed instantly. Reporters simultaneously grabbed their phones to send urgent news. Cameras were constantly pointed at Charlotte and the Welsh family. Some palace staff members exchanged surprised glances, while some officials were described as having only just learned of the decision at the same time as everyone else present at the event. What made the announcement even more controversial was not only its content, but also what was missing. King Charles was not standing beside William. Queen Camilla was not there to witness the moment. There was no coordinated statement from the king's office, nor was there any indication that this was a decision made by the entire royal family. This absence led many in the story to view it not just as an announcement about Charlotte, but as a symbolic declaration of the direction for the next generation. Following William's announcement, the moment that truly silenced Kensington Palace arrived as he gently led Charlotte forward. There was no lengthy speech, no elaborate prepared words. Charlotte simply stood beside her father, maintaining an astonishing composure for her young age. She smiled softly, bowed humbly, and looked towards the crowd whose attention was focused on her. It was this very simplicity that gave the moment its special power. Charlotte didn't need to say anything grand. The way she stood before the cameras, showing no fear or confusion, was enough to convey to many that she had been well prepared for this day. Within minutes, the first photos began circulating. Charlotte stood beside William looking composed. Catherine stood behind them, silently observing her daughter. George was nearby, watching intently as his sister stepped into a new role. When the four of them appeared together in one frame, the image was no longer just a family moment. It began to be seen as a portrait of a generation of royalty gradually stepping into the center. Many immediately drew parallels between Charlotte and Princess Diana, not just because of her appearance, but because of the warmth and naturalness she displayed in public. Charlotte's smile, her observation of those around her, and the intimacy in her expressions reminded people of Diana's special ability to connect with others. But at the same time, Charlotte possessed another quality. That was the calmness, steadfastness, and ability to control emotions very similar to Queen Elizabeth II. The combination of Diana's warmth and Queen Elizabeth's steadfastness made Charlotte a powerful symbol in the story. She was no longer just George's sister or a young member appearing to complete a family photo. From that moment, Charlotte was introduced as a figure with her own responsibilities and a real place in the future of the monarchy. But Charlotte was not alone. Throughout William's announcement of his daughter's new role, Catherine remained in the background with absolute composure. She didn't interrupt the speech, didn't try to draw attention, but every gesture showed she understood the significance of this moment. At one point, Catherine gently placed her hand on George's back. It was a small gesture, but it held many layers of meaning. Perhaps it was a mother's way of reassuring her son when all eyes suddenly turned to his sister. Or perhaps it was a subtle reminder that George's role was not threatened, and that the family was still navigating this important moment together. George showed no discomfort. He didn't turn away, didn't show jealousy, and didn't try to regain the attention. George simply observed Charlotte with the calm demeanor of someone who seemed to have understood beforehand that royal responsibility should not rest on a single person. William and Catherine deliberately raised their children with a mindset very different from the rivalries in royal history. The throne is not a reward, it is a responsibility. Serving the public is not a race for the spotlight. Each person has a role to play. George doesn't need to monopolize all the attention just because he's the heir. And Charlotte doesn't need to live her whole life as a supporting character in her brother's story. The way Catherine stood behind George calmly observed, and William led Charlotte forward, conveyed a message more powerful than any speech. This wasn't the image of a family vying for power. This was the image of a family preparing to shoulder responsibility together. And in that moment, many felt they were not just seeing a young princess beginning a new mission. They were witnessing the first steps of an unofficial dynasty that had not yet begun. After William finished his announcement, public attention quickly shifted away from Kensington Palace and toward the two people absent during this crucial moment, King Charles and Queen Camilla. Many awaited an official response, perhaps a congratulatory message for Charlotte, perhaps a statement of support from the king's office, or at least a joint statement affirming that the entire royal family was acting in unity. But nothing appeared. No congratulations. No recognition of Charlotte's new role. No statement of support from Charles. Neither was there any public response from Camilla. The silence dragged on, and the longer it lasted, the greater the question surrounding William's decision became. If Charles and Camilla knew beforehand, why hadn't the king's office prepared a concurring message? If this was a decision made by the entire family, why was there no coordinated statement? And if Charlotte's new role was a move supported by the king himself, why is he completely absent from the narrative? It is this void that leads many to believe that Charles and Camilla were truly caught off guard. The decision may not have been coordinated with the king's office. William may have acted independently within the Welsh family. And more importantly, the image of a royal family that always operates as a unified entity is beginning to show more visible cracks. In the royal family, sometimes what is left unsaid carries more weight than all official statements. Charles and Camilla's silence doesn't prove anything definitively, but in the way the story is told, it becomes the strongest evidence that the balance of power is shifting. While Clarence House remained silent, the media quickly chose which stories to pursue. Articles, images, and commentary all focused on the Welsh family. They talked about Charlotte's maturity, about William's vision, about Catherine's composure, about how George stood beside and calmly supported his sister. And above all, they talked about the image of a young, united royal family, seemingly ready for the future. Photos from Kensington appeared everywhere. Charlotte standing beside her father, Catherine quietly behind, George observing with confidence. The four of them together created a frame with greater symbolic power than any palace announcement. Meanwhile, Charles and Camilla almost disappeared from the news. They were still the king and queen. They still held their titles, ceremonies, and official positions. But they are no longer the center of the moment of greatest public interest. This highlights an important truth: power in a monarchy doesn't just come from the throne. It also comes from the ability to attract attention. From the public's trust in a person, from how they connect with society, and from the feeling that they represent the next direction of the institution. William, Catherine, George, and Charlotte possess all of those elements. The public sees not just a beloved family. They see stability, intimateness, a new generation, and a future that seems very well prepared. Charles and Camilla haven't been removed from the royal family. But when the media, public opinion, and public attention all shift in one direction, official titles are sometimes no longer enough to keep someone at the center. After all, Charles and Camilla still retain their titles, positions, ceremonies, and official power. Charles remains king, Camilla remains queen, but they face two very different choices. The first is to accept the ongoing transition support William, Catherine, George, and Charlotte, and use the remaining years of the reign to prepare a stable future for the monarchy. The second is to continue to reassert their hierarchy, resist the growing influence of Kensington Palace, and risk further alienating their public image. Charles has waited almost his entire life to become king, but now his reign risks being perceived as a transitional period. Camilla has spent many years becoming queen, but just as she reaches the pinnacle of her position, she witnesses her influence gradually being usurped. And then the story returns to that summer afternoon in Kensington. William stood before the crowd speaking of his promise of service. Catherine stood calmly beside him. George silently observed his sister. Charlotte stepped forward to begin a new role. The transition didn't happen with a grand decree. It happened through public attention, media reaction, subtle personnel changes, and the introduction of a new generation. Perhaps the future of the crown didn't begin on the day William ascended the throne. Perhaps it began that very afternoon when Charlotte stepped forward and the world realized that a new generation was ready. Do you think Charlotte's early preparation was a smart move, or was she still too young? Leave your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.